Welcome to Living from the Heart. I am your host, Tina Thrussell, co-founder of Best You Can Be and messenger of the Shin Tao, the Way of the Heart. The Way of the Heart is the underlying message that ties together all the other things I do. I do work as a spiritual healer, a Nia teacher. Nia is a blend of dance, martial arts, and healing arts, as a workshop and seminar facilitator, a retreat host, host of women's nurture circles, board of director for Unity of Calgary, a long list of things that I do. And the common theme in that is it's about living the Shin Tao, the way of the heart, the way of love, kindness, and compassion for yourself first. For when you have that for yourself, then you can offer it to the world. And I know that my guest today, Gemma Stone, certainly understands that. I first met Gemma when she was a speaker at Unity of Calgary, and I was quite surprised to hear that she had this psychology background, because she didn't fit my stereotypical vision of what a psychologist would look like. And I was delighted by her heartfelt talk, her presentation, and I finally was able to arrange to have her here with us today. So without further ado, I would love to have you meet Gemma Stone. Let's bring her on screen. Good morning, Gemma.
Good morning, Tina. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well, it's just all truth. You are this lovely heart-based person, and that's what the show is all about, returning people to living from their heart. And the emotional intelligence and resilience work that you do certainly has to help people do that. And when I was on your website and looked at this story, I thought, ooh, that's interesting. We've got to have you talk about that. So do you want to talk a little bit about that trip and what happened? And
Yes, yeah, I'd love to. And I also really appreciate this message around living from the heart. And I definitely understand that orientation towards psychology, maybe being a little bit more on the mind and having like kind of an image of what a psychologist might look like or talk about. And one of the things that I discovered on this trip that you're talking about is how important it is that we reconnect with our hearts. And for me, the journey was all about moving from a place of fear into a place of love. So the journey begins way back when I was a young adult trying to think about what sort of impact I wanted to have in the world. I was in university at the time, and I was feeling a little bit disillusioned with the whole academic experience. And so I decided that my next move was to save the world. So I promptly signed up for a program to do international development work. And as part of that, they selected the country that we went to go and have an impact, to go and do some meaningful work in a different country. So I was selected to go to Guyana, which is a little tiny country in South America. And when we landed, it was such a contrast. I had traveled a little bit before, but never to a developing country like that. So when I first arrived in the country, I was so sick, and we were really disoriented. We had to take this 5-day trek to get into the middle of the jungle. So we took like dugout canoes and paddled up these rivers that were filled with piranhas, and and it was just this wild adventure that was overwhelming and really moving. One of the stories that I found myself in when I was in Guyana was the one that you're talking about. So it was my birthday. I don't recall what birthday it was. I think it was maybe my 21st birthday. And so instead of going out and partying like many 21-year-olds do, the community that we lived in, which is a really small indigenous community in the middle of the jungle that hadn't had a lot of exposure to the city life, they wanted to do a celebration for my birthday, which was really sweet. So all the villagers gathered together, including myself and some of the other volunteers, and we decided we were going to have a bonfire. So we were all trekking into the jungle and dragging out dried up palm fronds. So those are like on the palm trees. Once they dry up, they just fall to the ground. And so there's lots of, and they're wonderful to light fires with. So there's lots of palm fronds all over the jungle floor. So we were dragging them all together. And my job was to drag the palm frond and throw it over top, throw it into the pile, into the bonfire pile, and then other people would drag them to the bonfire. So as I was doing this, I wasn't very aware of my surroundings. I was not very present. I was just sort of, like in task mode and doing mode, and wasn't really aware of what was happening around me. And one of the things that I wasn't aware of is that this one palm frond as I threw it over my head, that it was a nest for tarantulas.
Oh,
yes. So as I threw it over my head, understandably, the tarantula was confused about what was happening to their home, and jumped on my shoulder. And I didn't notice it at the time, but I was wearing a white shirt and I had this, black sort of like thing here. So I got it out of the corner of my eye and sort of looked and freaked out, and threw it off my shoulder, and it landed on the ground. And I, at first was terrified, and then I was like, I just survived a tarantula attack. I was so proud of myself, and I was like running back to the village. And one of my dear friends there was the elder in the village, and I went and told him about what had happened. I was all proud and feeling really like, look at what I did. And he was just this really, really sweet old man with sort of like weathered skin and these really dark eyes that shone. And he looked at me with like such sadness in his eyes, and just taught me that in my lack of presence and my lack of awareness and my instant response into fear, not only had I destroyed the tarantula's home, but tarantulas are very, very fragile creatures. And so it was really unlikely that it would have survived the fall from my shoulder and the flick off my shoulder onto the earth, and likely died. And so he sat me down and taught me this lesson about how important it is that we are conscious about the impact we're having on ourselves and on the world, and also the value of living from love over fear. Because in that moment, fear completely took over and ended up destroying this creature and destroying its home. And so that night we had the bonfire, and I was looking at him like through like the flickering of the flame, and he had this really deep compassion for me, because he could see that how much it moved me, the lesson and the experience. And so, I think a lot of people's 21-year-old birthdays don't look like that, but for me, it really seared this lesson of love over fear. And I'm gentle with myself around that. Like, as humans, we have a bit of wiring towards fear, and spiders are, depending on the culture you grew up in, one of those ones that we're sort of instinctively, we move away from. But I think that the lesson is bigger than that. I think the lesson is, there are so many ways in which we reactively respond out of fear. And when we can slow down, when we can get present, when we can be conscious about who we want to be and how we want to show up in the lives that we want to live, we can choose love. And that's the force of creation. It's the force of, everything that's good in the world, I believe, comes from a place of love, whether it's ideas, or whether it's books, or whether it's programs like your own, or whether it's talks, or whether it's children. Like, there's just so much that comes from love when we can settle our fears, either the ones that are natural and instinctive, or the ones that we've been conditioned to believe in, and be conscious about choosing the way of the heart, as you teach.
Wow. What a powerful, powerful experience, and a powerful lesson. And I think about, you mentioned that the fears that we're conditioned into, and oh my goodness, there are so many, aren't there? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's almost a daily basis that we're faced with fear. We may not label it as fear, we don't even recognize it as fear, but any anxiety or doubt or worry, that really all comes from fear. Mm-hmm. I remember reading Susan Jeffers' book many, 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 many years ago, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Okay. And she talks about how under all of the fears is this basic fear that I can't handle it. Yeah. And that drives everything. All those levels of fear come, if you keep working down through the levels, there's this fear that we are not going to be able to handle whatever the situation is, whether it's real or concocted, because let's face it, most of the time the fears that we create are concocted. It's thinking, oh, this could happen, this could happen. And it's like, well, that's not happening. As you say, if we're present, we're right here, right now. Right here, right now, everything's fine. But all that projecting forward.
Yeah, it's so true. And that was really just kind of the beginning of my awareness around the power of love and fear, and especially our awareness around it. And from there, I then began to explore more deeply the psychology orientation, and like the some of the science and some of the philosophy of psychology. And in the early days, I created the spectrum around the spectrum of fear and the spectrum of love. And just even for myself, I started to slot different things under each one, and different emotions and different experiences under each one, so that I could be more aware of, the emotional spectrum, and how much am I living from a place of love versus how much am I living from a place of fear. And I had a very early, intense experience with a lot of trauma in my childhood. And I eventually learned that my brain was much more wired towards fear than it was for love. All humans have that. We have 3 times the number of neurons to pay attention to the bad stuff, the scary stuff, over the good stuff. So everybody is wired that way. But for people that have had a lot more trauma in their early years, their brain begins to adapt to that trauma and say, I need to pay attention to the bad and scary stuff even more. And so I had that orientation and struggled a lot with fear, anxiety, panic attacks, this statement that you shared there around like the fear of like, I just won't be okay. And whether that's fear of rejection or fear of abandonment or fear of intimacy or fear of failure or fear of success, like there's all different ways that this shows up, but ultimately it comes down to that I'm not going to survive unless I have all these defense mechanisms that keep me safe. But unfortunately in our world, those defense mechanisms typically don't keep us safe. They actually usually promote more suffering and more of the struggle that we're trying to get away from.
What a sad irony, hey?
It really is. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you offer this spectrum to people that you work with?
Yeah, I do. My philosophy is a lot around how do we become aware of the ways in which we're living from fear over love, and then how do we align the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind towards more love instead of fear, and then how do we align mind, body, spirit. And so it's sort of these 3 different assessment pieces around love, fear. Let's align your mind, and then let's align mind, body, spirit in the direction of more love. I think I have the document somewhere. I'd be happy to share it with you and with your community so you can take a peek at it. I probably developed it about 11 years ago, so it feels like it might be a little bit outdated, but I'd be happy to share it.
Oh, wow. That would be brilliant. It makes me think maybe it's even something that you could have on your website as a resource for people to reference.
Yes, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. But for sure, if you'd like to share it with us, we can post it on the Shindao page, and share it maybe in our upcoming issue of Heart and Mind Matters.
Oh, lovely.
I should actually just let people know that we do have a what am I saying? I'm trying to search through oh my goodness, I can't speak either. Search through the list of little banners that I have to indicate the can't find it. Never mind. We'll forget it. It's going to throw me off completely. Dear. I was going to show the little scroller that says subscribe to Heart and Mind Matters, right?
Oh, yes.
.ca. And then if we put that in there, then people will get a copy of that spectrum, and we'll make it all happen. We'll make it all happen. So where did you go after this journey to Guyana and having this major revelation about living in love versus living in fear?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It was a bit of a circuitous route to where I am right now. So I ended up coming back to Calgary. Well, I wasn't in Calgary. I came to Calgary because Calgary was the only university in Western Canada that had a degree in international development. And I fell in love. I had so many life lessons when I was in Guyana, and really felt like I came home to the place that I wanted to be in terms of the work I wanted to do in the world. So I came to Calgary to take the degree in international development and continue with my passion of having a meaningful impact. And halfway through my degree program, I had a professor that advised me that if I actually wanted to have an impact on the world, instead of taking a degree in international development, I should go and take a degree in something practical and then go overseas. Because if I was taking this degree in international development, I'd be writing policies and sitting behind a desk, which ultimately is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the ground, be with the people. So I began to explore different options for that. I took some pre-law and explored the possibility of maybe doing some teaching. And then through all of those endeavors, I ended up taking some psychology courses and instantly was like, oh, this is my language. This is my home. I was naturally oriented towards some of the philosophies and the way of being with people. So I just continued on the psychology route, and I kind of lost my way a little bit. I did a couple of degrees. I ended up teaching for colleges and universities. I worked with a bunch of agencies, and I became more and more depressed. It was always birthdays. Birthdays are always these days for me where I have this like waking up moment. So it was my 25th birthday, and I was trying to do all the self-love things. So I had a bottle of champagne, and I have Godiva organic dark chocolate peanut butter cups, and I had bubble bath and candles. And I was in the tub, and I also had what I thought I was supposed to have. Like I had a house, and I had a golden retriever, which I was like checking all the boxes of life and feeling just utterly empty, like so lost and so disconnected from myself. And as a result, my soul was suffering with depression and anxiety, and starting to struggle with addictions. And that's when that started to come in. So I was about 100 pounds heavier than I am right now. I was about $100,000 in debt. Eating Ben and Jerry's every night and drinking a bottle of wine. Like it was, buying shoes to make myself feel better. So I was pretty deeply lost. And it was this moment in the tub where I kind of got back into that lesson around love and fear. And I was blessed to have another mentor a little bit later in life. And he had just come into my life at that time. And he had taught me again, like this is a lesson I think of my whole lifetime. I'm not sure if it's dharma or karma or what it is, but it keeps circling back. And he taught me again that the reminder of to live from love. And he gave me another one of those sort of painful life lessons, and then told me that he was dying. So I had about 4 months to be with him through his journey into death, and continue to really examine my life. And there's this intersection of the reminder of living from love over fear, and then also being confronted with the reality of death at the same time, that just seared that lesson in even deeper and really allowed me to look at, like, if this was my last year, if I had 4 months, how would I be feeling about how I'm living right now? And I felt super lost. And so I made a lot of changes then. I rediscovered my passion for development work. I started blending my psychology work with kind of more soul spirit-based work. I launched campaigns to build wells. So now we've built over 5 wells for over 1,300 people in countries all over the world. And really started to just like find my groove and get away from all the things I thought I should be, all the kind of conditioning and the training about the expectations of how we need to be good humans and adults in life, and much more oriented towards what was authentic to me, and really reconnecting with my authentic self. And I noticed that the more I did this, the less medications I needed to stabilize my brain. And it was a couple of years of a lot of searing realizations and a lot of like destruction, a lot of the work that I was doing, the relationship that I was in, the house that I had, like everything kind of burnt to the ground. And then I rebuilt from this more authentic, aligned place. And that's really the path that I've been on ever since then, is doing my own work in the world, really focusing on how do we blend the science of psychology with the wisdom of whatever this other place is, spirit, soul, and then helping others to find their way too. Because I think that's one of the challenges I notice a lot in the world and with my clients is there's this feeling of being lost and not at home in ourselves, not feeling at home in our lives. And then our mind struggles and suffers with that gap. We call it cognitive dissonance, when you're living one way but your truth is over here. And the bigger this gap is, I think the more we struggle and we suffer. And so my work has really been, how do we close the gap between how we think we should be living and who we are? How do we close that gap? How do we close the gap between living from love, living from fear? How do we close the gap between what we consciously want and what our subconscious is programmed for because of past experiences or traumas? How do we close that gap? How do we close the gap between the mind and the body so there's not so much disconnection? So that's really has been my work since then.
Wow, so powerful. And I, as I listen to you, I think, oh, how's that possible? There's so many big gaps there. How do you close those gaps? How do you do it?
I mean, that's such a good question. And that's the piece about my work that I love the most is each person's path is really unique to their own essence, the essence of them. So my path looked a lot like reconnecting with my authentic self. So I think that's probably the best way to say, if you can only do one thing to close the gap, it's getting to know what's your authentic self, aside, like, if you can separate out the trauma, if you can separate the conditioning and the fear and all those pieces and keep coming home to yourself, that ends up being the most trustworthy compass in terms of how do we close the gap. And for everybody, it's different. So for me, closing the gap meant I quit my job and I ended my marriage. But for some people, it means diving into their healing work and uncovering what are all the things that are stopping them from having the marriage they want to have. And so they come back together and they really strengthen and deepen, and they end up having this relationship that inspires them both to heal and to rise into those authentic pieces of who they are. Another part of my journey at some point ended up, like, I sold everything. I sold my house. I sold all my belongings. I packed up my kids, and actually at the same time, my ex-husband, into a Volkswagen van. And we left, we just toured around Mexico and the United States and Canada. We lived in a van for a year, and we homeschooled, and I worked online with people. And, my kid's father and I, we just discovered how to have a really bonded, close relationship where we are amazing co-parents, but we're not married anymore. And so, like, that was my journey, but not everybody needs to sell everything and buy a Volkswagen van to close the gap. So it's really about helping each individual connect with their truth and then live that truth out in the world.
How beautiful. How beautiful. And I do find that this is a common theme between all the guests on the show. Everyone says the same thing, that you really do have to come back to honoring the true essence of who you are and what you love to do and what really makes your heart sing. Because without that feeling of being lost is always, always there.
Yeah.
You were going to say something.
Yeah, just and that piece that we're talking about, like, yes, there's so many gaps. How do you close them all? I think that the closing of that gap of, I call it your true self and your constructed self. So the essence of who you are versus the construction of everything else that we think we should be, and the defense mechanisms, all that, it becomes like a muscle. And so it becomes strengthened over time, and it becomes easier and faster to close the gaps, and you become more aware of where the gaps are and how to tighten them up faster. So for me, it took a few years to close the first one, but the time that it takes now is much less. There's much less length to it and much less struggle to it. And also there's a in a good and a hard way, I'm less tolerable of living out of alignment. So it doesn't happen as much or as frequently because I feel it right away and then I want to get back in alignment. So for some people, it can feel like it's this never ending journey of trying to figure out, like, how do you close all these gaps? But I think the good news is when we do it once, we strengthen that muscle and it becomes easier and faster to do it again and again and again. And then life becomes like, we pick up this almost like velocity towards love and velocity towards coming home to ourselves that speeds up the process and shortens the length of suffering that we're in.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think about, it's like going to the gym, right? You work out, you get fit, and then something happens, you have an injury, you fall off of that. But when you get back into it, you get back into the shape you were in that much faster.
Yeah.
Because it's like the muscle memory, right? You've been there, it knows how to happen. So it's reassuring to know that can happen with what's going on internally, mentally, emotionally, as well as on that physical level.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. That it really is what it's like. And that's true. Like, sometimes we can't help, like the analogy of the gym, sometimes we can't help that we got injured. Sometimes life throws some curveballs our way and it does knock us off course. And those things we can't control always. But what we can control is how much quickly we come back to ourselves. And that we don't give up going to the gym. Like, we keep trying to get back into the shape and get reconnected to the essence that we had before the hard thing happened. And that's really, when we talked before at the beginning of the introduction about my passion around emotional intelligence and resilience, I think the first part of my journey was a lot about emotional intelligence and this piece around awareness and love and fear and healing the traumas and the defense mechanisms. And now I'm really interested in resilience and how do we go through these hard things and become stronger than we were before them? How do we, life throws us curveballs and pandemics and crazy things. And how do we keep coming home to ourselves quicker and more easily so that we develop the confidence and the resilience to know that we can handle anything that comes our way? And that's really what I'm entering into right now, which has been so fascinating.
And so timely with what the whole world is going through right now.
Yeah.
Wow. People are really falling off course from life and just feeling even more lost than ever. So to believe that we can bounce back from this is really important. Really.
Yeah, it's so important. And I noticed this experience where a lot of people hit, like, the way they come home to themselves is that they hit rock bottom in a way. Like, they lost the job, their relationship ended, maybe there was a health crisis, there's some type of like hitting rock bottom. And then there's a kind of this awakening piece around, oh, how am I living? So for me, it was a little bit of that moment in Guyana, but it was certainly with my mentor and realizing like death could be just around the corner, and how am I living? And that was in the bathtub that night, like crying and trying to love myself and all the medications to try to help that happen and everything. That was sort of my rock bottom moment, and realizing that I'm not alone in that a lot of people hit this really difficult place and either fall apart and spiral into a darker place, or hit that place and then bounce back. And this is where I'm really interested in. And it's like, how do we help people bounce back faster and easier and more authentically and from a place of love instead of fear? Because these hard things, they can harden us if we allow them to. But if we allow ourselves to kind of go through this path of resilience, and you call it, instead of post-traumatic stress, there's post-traumatic growth. Like, how do we go through these hard things and become more growthful, more conscious, more loving, more aware? And then we can avoid that spiral into the dark place, which actually takes us so much longer to climb out of. I think that's really the most important psychological strength that we can cultivate. After coming home to ourselves in authenticity, next is resilience.
Beautiful. I just got this comment. Best you can be, live the Shindao. That would be my husband, who's obviously watching this show. He said, it's powerful finding your authentic self. And yeah, that was obviously a while ago. I missed that comment because we moved past that. Well, not really, because it's still that resilience part is about coming back to that authentic self, right?
Yeah, it really is about coming back to it and strengthening it. So that becomes our home. That becomes our comfort zone. Even though sometimes it's uncomfortable to live authentically, it becomes more comfortable to live authentically than to live inauthentically. And also noticing and trusting that no matter what life throws our way, whether it is job loss, or whether it's a health crisis, or whether it's a pandemic, or whatever it is, that we can really trust ourselves to navigate it in the healthiest way possible, and to really truly believe that on the other side of this are good things. It's that whole concept of like life happening for us instead of to us, and really taking the sense of like being in a power position around, all right, I can't control what's happening outside of me all the time. I can't control what's happening in the world, but I can control my response to it. And from that place, we can develop strength and confidence and resilience and even more love and compassion for self and others. And I just think it's such a rich place to be able to spend time if we know how to. But I think a lot of people struggle with, that sounds great, but I don't know how. And that's really what I'm interested in.
Yeah. So valuable to be able to teach people that, to help them with that. Mm-hmm. And I think what you just said there, it took me back to your talk at Unity, because that's very much in alignment with the Unity principles, that we create our life with our thinking and our choices about how we approach things, and understanding that can help us return to that place of love. And that was just a beautiful tie in. Mm-hmm. So we're getting close to the end of our time. So just before we are winding up, I just want to take a moment and flash this up on the screen. And for those who might be listening to the audio and not seeing this, I will just share with you what I've got on screen is an opportunity for you to book a Heartway session with me to help you feel lighter and calm, more relaxed, peaceful, centered, and shifting a little bit away from the pain and suffering and more into relief and joy. You can get a $20 discount by entering the word heart with a capital H at the website bestyoucanbe.ca/booktina. That's best, the letter U, CAN, the letter B.ca/booktina. And this could be a first step. It's kind of like, this is a nice way of medicating. Rather than taking some drugs, we use sound and energy to get you stable enough that you can get to that place of being able to look at what's going on. I'm going to bring Gemma back on. You probably can relate to that. Sometimes there's the use of an antidepressant to just take the edge off of that enough so that a person really can go within, right?
Yeah.
So this is a non-prescription medication, this use of sound, these Heartway sessions. I also want to remind people that we have a podcast page, podcast.bestyoucanbe.ca, where the audio versions of these shows, and there are 54 of them now, on our YouTube channel. There are these videos, Neil's Uplift shows, lots of great, inspiring conversations for you to check out there. The YouTube channel is Best You Can Be. That's best, the letter U, can, and the letter B. Gemma, you've shared so much wonderful insight and wisdom in terms of what is possible for people in terms of coming back to your authentic self, living in alignment with your heart, with your life, that you have actual tools to help people get to that place. You have a beautiful website that has all sorts of great information. What has happened to my banners? Where did they go? Just a minute. Where did I put it? Gotta get it back up on screen. Where are you? My goodness, we're having a morning. There it is. GemmaStone.org. You see that on screen. So tell us, what will people find there?
I do a lot of writing over at Gemma Stone. So under the writing section, there's all kinds of articles. And then also there's a subscribe box. So if you want to sign up for my love letters, I send out through my love letters like personal tidbits. I send stories. I send a lot of tools and strategies for emotional intelligence and resilience and just overall designing a life you love. And also my book. So I wrote a book called Your Great Life, a soulful and strategic guide to designing a life you love, which is a lot about this whole process of coming back home to yourself and connecting with your authentic self. There's lots of prompts in there and practices that people can use as a jumping off point. And so if you subscribe to the newsletter, then I'll send the first 3 chapters of those your way. So you can just get started with that right away if you'd like to. And then also, of course, contact me if you have any questions or if there's something that's coming up for you. If you're looking for resources, I'm happy to support. So all of that's over at GemmaStone.org.
Oh, a beautiful list of resources. That sounds fabulous. And how nice, not a newsletter, but love letters.
Love letters.
Oh, that is awesome. I love it. I absolutely love it. If you had some final words to share with our listeners, our audience, what would you want to share?
I think the part that I've become most connected to is just this truth that it's a little cliche, but I think there's so much truth that we're on this, we're all on this journey together. And as we continue to invest our time and our energy and our hearts and our attention into living a life that we love, loving ourselves, loving others, loving the world, that's when we really begin to settle into the transformation that we're looking for in our little worlds, but also in our bigger world. And so that's the one piece is it's worth it. Sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's a struggle. And I know that sometimes it can be easy to feel disheartened, especially with some of the big things that have been happening in the world. But, we create the shift that we're looking for by continuing to invest in the love that we want to see in ourselves and each other in the world. So just keep going, keep moving towards living from the heart and adding more love to the world.
That's so beautiful. What a beautiful closing comment.
Mm.
Live from your heart and bring more love to the world. That's what we invite all of our listeners and viewers to do. And Gemma Stone might be able to help you do that. So by all means, connect with her, subscribe for her love letters. Thank you so much, Gemma, for sharing your beautiful essence, your wisdom, your story, your journey, and your resources with our world.
Thank you, Tina. And thank you for this invitation. It's so lovely to connect with you and your community. And I'm just so grateful for the work that you're doing in the world. I think every little drop of love we can add to the bucket makes a big difference.
It does. It absolutely does. I thank you. I'll ask you to hang on just a moment and we'll say to our viewers, ciao for now. Until next week, create a beautiful love-filled week.